Keep talking nonetheless. So, Boxing Squared live stream for another week. I've got a number of topics on my list that I want to canvass. Obviously, the big fight last weekend, a new champion, redemption story. There was a lot to like about the performance. Obviously, it hasn't made everybody happy, but a win is a win, and we'll talk about some of the fallout from that. Who's next for Joshua? Andy Ruiz Jr., with his admissions after the fight, what did you make of them? We'll talk about that too. Andy Ruiz Jr. also talking about coming back stronger, going to get back in the gym. I think there will be a few skeptical people given what's transpired with that fight on December 7th. So I can see now we've got some people in the chat here. Yeah, I wasn't quite sure if it was live. There was something funny coming across my screen. So it seems to be. So we've got IEB in the chat, UK Rob, Liam Roskell. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining the live stream. It's actually showing me 0 people in the chat, even though I can see comments. So I don't know. It seems to be catching up here, the software that I'm using. Ruben is here, same as JPK World. Hello to you as well. So some of the other things on my list, apart from the Ruiz Jr. and Joshua rematch and the fallout from that, obviously there's been a bit of talk amongst the place about, well, why can't we just have an undisputed fight? But it's boxing. It's never really that easy, is it? Transnational rankings, they are out. Also, you've had BoxRec change. You've also had the Ring update their rankings. The number one is different in all three. We'll get to that. Not a lot of heavyweight boxing this weekend, but there is the Ultimate Boxer Tournament. We'll quickly touch on that. Patreon questions as well. And also, Joe Joyce, he gets his gold title back after the WBA had said in its rankings that he'd vacated it, but now he is back there with an asterisk next to his name, whatever that means. And we'll cover the schedule as well. There's some prospects in action, but as I mentioned, relatively light in the scheme of things. Okay, so the chat is well and truly working now. 19 people in the building. Thank you for joining the live stream, one and all, wherever you are at, morning, noon, and night. I do thank you. Appreciate the time coming to the channel, supporting the content, and yeah, it's been a funny old year for the heavyweight division. Where December 13, where I am right now, might be the 12th in the northern hemisphere in some parts, but it's been a real roller coaster, up and down. Not necessarily as many big fights or even medium fights as we maybe were treated to in the last couple of years, but there has been some sort of highlights in between some of the troughs, definitely peaks and troughs this year in 2019. So the chat is really sort of going for it now. So what I will say is, obviously I found it hard to keep up in previous weeks. So one of the things that I am going to try to do is when I'm covering a topic, I'll call for people to drop your thoughts on that, and I'll try to get to as many as possible. But when I'm getting to something else, or if you want to specifically ask me a question, please save it until I'm calling for it, because I'm going to try to keep up with the chat. And when there's 20, 30, 40 comments and they come in quick succession, it's impossible to keep up. So don't feel discouraged or like I'm ignoring your comment. Sometimes it just is a little hard to keep up, and I'm going to really try to stick to the top of the comment section, or thereabouts. But starting off with the fight in Saudi Arabia, that was, I guess, not completely unexpected, because I mean a lot of people saw that this was going to be a competitive fight. It would have been a fight if the adjustments were made, and I said so much in my pre-fight coverage. It came down to execution, who could make the better adjustments, and ultimately it turned out to be Anthony Joshua. And I had a few weirdos who came onto the channel, said I needed to apologize to Anthony Joshua for saying he'd lose, but I don't think they even follow the channel, because I never said he would lose. I never said Andy Ruiz Jr. would lose. I said it was just too close to call given all the factors. But if you saw my weigh-in video, I said this may change some people's opinion of the fight. 283, 15 pounds heavier. It certainly was a red flag, and I know that there were still a number of people thinking, well, that's not necessarily a disadvantage for Ruiz, but ultimately, after the fight he came out and said he hadn't trained hard enough, and effectively he didn't really try his best, which very disappointing to hear. It really was. And I think if he had maybe not said as much and given more credit to Joshua, because some of it more seems about he's making excuses for his lack of a performance as opposed to giving Joshua the credit for his performance. I mean, Ruiz Jr. knew what Joshua was going to try and do, but he wasn't able to respond. And obviously in the final weeks of his training camp, he blew out in weight. And Michael Hunter, who had been training with Ruiz about a month or so before the fight, he'd been having some sparring work with him, obviously beneficial for his fight with Povetkin, said that Ruiz Jr. was a lot slimmer, said that he looked sharp and he was actually really good sparring in the gym, that he looked like he was going to be going into this fight all guns blazing, but for whatever reason, things fell apart in the final few weeks of the camp. Ate his way to 283 pounds and ate himself out of the title. But obviously, even if he was 268 or 260, whatever the case may be, given the style, Joshua being the bigger man who was able to execute a game plan from long range, use movement, use the jab, right hands, use them judiciously. And this is stuff I was largely sort of throwing out in my pre-fight coverage. He was able to do that. Ruiz Jr.'s got relatively slow feet compared to his fast hands. So would have he been able to nullify that even if he was at a much better weight? Well, we just don't know now, because obviously it's gone. He wasn't in shape, and he was obviously disappointed with his performance in the ring. But Joshua, two-time champion, and deservedly so on that performance. And I guess we've seen a lot of criticism in recent days by some fans by other fighters, even commentators, that Joshua wasn't necessarily fighting a game plan that would inspire, a big mass reaction to sort of give him a hand clap, that sort of thing. Some of that, I actually think, in the context of the performance and what he had to do, he did the job. It was a good win, very good win. Was it an all-time great win? No, I'm not going to go that far, but it was a good win. He got the job done. And remember, there was a lot of people calling for his head if he had have lost that fight. A lot of people were already saying ahead of the fight that he should retire if he loses, which, as you know, I sort of said was nonsense, in that even if he lost, there would have been a way to find his way back in the heavyweight division. Given he is a cash cow, there would have always been fights there for him. Obviously, the path back to a heavyweight title, it might have been a number of fights and a rebuild, but obviously doesn't have to worry about that now. So what I will do now is I'll call for a couple of comments in the chat. If you want to have me ask a couple of questions, etc., please drop them now. Everyone who's here, we've got 44 in the chat at the moment. Thank you for joining the Boxing Squared live stream, one and all, wherever you are in the world, morning, noon or night. I do appreciate it. So Big Problem says Ruiz would have won if he took the fight seriously. Well, hard to say now, because it's gone. He can't get that one back. The chat after the fight saying the third fight, it's it really is wishful thinking he's going to get a third fight anytime soon. That was his opportunity. If he can't stay motivated being the heavyweight champion of the world, and he ate himself out of the title, partied with his friends a bit too hard, ignored his trainers and his father in the final weeks of camp, I mean, what sort of stock can we put in anything that he says now in terms of his training? Even a tweet, and I'll just get to that. You may have seen this one. He said, I'll be back stronger. I will be a champion once again. I appreciate all the love and support from my true fans. I appreciate the haters as well, and can't wait to prove the haters wrong once again. Back to the gym. Let's start this journey to the belts. Well, he said that the haters motivated him in the rematch too, that, he loved being the underdog. And he's saying back to the gym, but he couldn't spend enough time in it for the rematch. It's disappointing, some of what Ruiz Jr. said post-fight, because it did serve, in my view, even though he was trying to make excuses for his performance, it served to try to undermine Joshua's performance. And I'm not necessarily sure he intended to do that completely, maybe a little bit, but he really did kind of torpedo himself. And he has, obviously raised more of the parallels between him and Buster Douglas. Big upset, not able to sort of stay on point for the second or for the next fight that they were in, defending the belt for the first time following the big upset. So Adam says Ruiz was too heavy, cost him the fight more than how AJ boxed. Big Problem says AJ seemed to level down. If anything, he looked terrible in that fight. PED says, shake my head. George Michael says, when you're 5'11", 284 pounds, can't move, pathetic shape, Tim Tam diet. Well, it seemed to be he must have been hoovering up everything in the final few weeks, because there was, about a month out from that fight, that photo with Michael Hunter, and he looked in pretty good condition. He had lost a lot of weight in camp, but then just seemingly hoovered up everything in Saudi Arabia and blew out. He probably was a little surprised at the actual weight. I mean, when you consider he got to the scale, he had all the clothes on, the sombrero, etc., he probably was more like 275, 277, something like that. But he knew he was going to be heavier, and he probably knew he was going to be criticized. And he, wore the t-shirt, the tank top, I should say. And whenever someone does that, it's not going to be a good number. Big Problem says Ortiz beats Ruiz. He's too slick of a boxer. Wallace says Parker versus Joshua 2 would be good if we had a fair referee. Well, I think we can sort of hold our breath on that one. Probably not going to happen anytime soon. Will AJ keep that weight and style or go back to the old AJ? I think it depends who he's fighting. Someone against Kubrat Pulev, maybe it would be a couple of pounds heavier, but even that match up there, that'll be interesting in terms of the style. Maybe Joshua will be a reformed sort of character now. Maybe he won't do as many weights because he knows actually it serves a purpose, doing more boxing work. He's talked about 50% here. When you bring that together and you're a whole, some of the analogies weren't great that he was using, but I understood what he meant, that spending more time in the gym benefited him overall. So George Michael says he thinks his nanny Pat could have moved on Ruiz. Adam says a fit Ruiz beats Ortiz in his opinion. Ped says Andy the excuse Ruiz. And that's part of the sort of post-fight that didn't necessarily flatter him. All the excuses. He said, I don't want to make an excuse, but here's 10 of them. Yeah, I don't think he enamored himself with fans. And spare a thought for all the people who were backing him and especially putting money on him. And effectively, to some degree, he pulled the wool over their eyes, said what a great camp it was. And I guess we hear that from everyone. But it's one of those things that, I don't think he did himself any favours, especially in the historical sense. People will talk about, he said he didn't train properly, that he, didn't put the work in, and he came in too heavy, didn't train hard enough, didn't listen to his coach and people, etc. So Tommy Temper is in the chat. Hello to you. Big Problem says no version of Ruiz could be best Ortiz. I wouldn't mind seeing that fight, but that needs to happen, I think, sooner rather than later. Ortiz, limited time, I think, left in the division, at least at an elite level. Wallace says, did you guys and girls notice how big/fat White looked? Not a great performance. We can talk about that as well at some point in the chat. Ruben says White came in a fat mess, and he was 11 pounds heavier than his heaviest weight. Normally fights roughly around 250, a little bit lighter for some of the big fights, but didn't sort of cover himself in glory in terms of the shape that he turned up in, 271. So Marcus says Ruiz has never tried to come in light, definitely thinks he would be quicker on his feet if he did come in at 235. Yeah, I don't understand what the strategy was. I think some of it just came down to, like he sort of said, overconfidence, and there's a whole accumulation of factors that he decided to take his foot off the gas on the diet front, the training front, whatever. It wasn't listening to his people, key people, and he just went off the reservation and did his own thing. I mean, whether that's true or not, to some extent, because these are excuses he's using. How much stock can we put into some of them? I mean, maybe he just figured that being at that heavier weight would work the same as the first fight, and confidence got the best of him. I don't know. I mean, can we really sort of take everything that he says, given what he'd said before the fight? Can we believe everything that he said after the fight? At least 100% of it. So Michael says, I think that picture with Michael Hunter was photoshopped. Well, it was a Michael Hunter photo. It wasn't an Andy Ruiz Jr. photo, so I don't know about that. George Michael says we want Parker Joshua to let them fight properly. I think Parker certainly needs to do something to earn his way back to a fight, because he didn't just lose that fight to Parker. So Joshua, he also lost to White too. But some of the controversy with that fight, a lot of people talk about that fight, but Parker's not a great inside fighter. So, I mean, I think some of it is overblown, but the referee far too involved in that fight. But, I mean, that was one of the things I thought from this fight this past weekend. At least Luis Pabon didn't insert himself too much. And I think that was a concern heading into it. So Martin says Ortiz versus Povetkin, who wins? It's a good question. That'd be a good fight. I mean, Povetkin has been working with the Matchroom stable through World of Boxing. He's probably only got 1 or 2 fights left, maybe one fight. That may be with Michael Hunter, maybe with Dillian White. I don't think there'll be a chance for an Ortiz fight. Ped says Usyk versus Parker. Lawrence Williams in the chat. Hello, Lawrence. Great channel there. Very good boxing knowledge, Lawrence Williams. Do check him out. Ruben Guerrero says, can see AJ getting out-jabbed by Pulev. Well, that'll sort of be interesting with that style clash, because that jab by Pulev, when it is used right, and let's bear in mind this year, I don't know, something about Kubrat Pulev and the way that he's been fighting, and his performances against Dinu and then also Rydell Booker hasn't looked great. Just, he looks a guy that is sort of, approaching 40s, 38 years old at the moment. Didn't look fantastic in those fights, and the jab wasn't really a great weapon in the Booker fight. And he seems to not be able to throw body shots. Rydell Booker was there for the taking if he just kept working the body. Every time he did hit Booker with the shot, he was getting a reaction, just wouldn't go back to it. So Gavin says Joshua will smash Pulev. And this will be the interesting thing, now that he's sort of tasted victory with a new style. Obviously a different fighter to Kubrat Pulev, but will he keep elements of that for that next fight, if that in fact is the next fight? Because Kubrat Pulev will not necessarily be as easy to find as Andy Ruiz Jr., but certainly very hittable. But I think a lot of people forget that Pulev and Joshua are basically the same height, although Joshua does have a little bit of a reach advantage. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to completely write off Kubrat Pulev, because stranger things have happened in the heavyweight division. And when he was trading with Ruiz up close, and Ruiz, is a decent puncher, but he's not a massive knockout artist. Kubrat Pulev does have some pop in his shot, so it's not like Joshua can just think he's going to walk through them. Although I think that seems to be the theory, what people think at the moment. So Ruben says Pulev probably has the second best jab that AJ has faced. Where are we here? Sorry, already fallen behind in the chat. It's so easy. I will catch up and as fast as I can before moving on to my next topic. Just have a sip of water. So Punch Quote says Kovnatski needs to take the Brazil fight. 2 call-outs and no fight. Is still stopping guys from fighting. Well, some of that, I believe, with Adam Kovnatski's case is the PBC is priming him for a heavyweight title shot. So I think this is why they're matching him carefully now, because they want to have him in reserve for when and if he's required to have a shot. And that's part of the reason I think he faced Areola. They knew that would be a decent test in terms of he was going to always win that fight, but Areola wasn't just going to lay down. And he probably made slightly harder work than people would have thought that would have gone in that fight. But Kovnatski, I wouldn't mind seeing him in with Luis Ortiz. I mean, Dominic Breazeale, Charles Martin, Gerald Washington, any of those fights I wouldn't... sorry, he's already faced Gerald Washington. What am I talking about? There was someone else in the PBC stable. Slips me. But any of those sort of fights that I mentioned, for a Wilder, a Fury undercard, I wouldn't mind it. They're going to have to put something meaty on that undercard. Before I continue, I'm just swallowing part of my beard here. Sorry about that. I'll just get to a question from Scott from Patreon. So he had asked me, if it's not too late for a Patreon question, can I ask you, have you any idea why they are taking so long in making the announcement of Wilder vs Fury 2? And not specifically, but Frank Warren did come out in the past 24 or 36 hours, effectively saying that he would hope in the next week to 10 days, so effectively before Christmas, that there would be some form of an announcement about that fight. And that, I guess, is not too surprising to me, at least, because I said, maybe it was last week's live stream, the earlier the better. If they can get an announcement out before Christmas, the more time to promote the fight, because that's going to be key. They're going to need to, get this out to the masses. And maybe because of the timing with Christmas, New Year, that sort of stuff, perhaps the week before Christmas, etc., we might see some form of announcement with maybe a press tour for early in the new year, maybe something like that. I don't know. But if there is any hold-ups, it's probably coming down to all those minor details, maybe not so minor, about broadcast arrangements, and there'll be 1,001 things that potentially could be holding this thing up in terms of the announcement. I mean, they've been trying to hammer out a deal for this rematch for the best part of 3 or 4 months since they announced that yes, this was going to be happening, because it sort of seemed to be they were, looking at that date, aiming for that date. They needed Fury to get past Wilder and be unscathed, and obviously there was the cut. Then they needed Wilder to get past Ortiz and not to sustain any damage. And from appearances, it doesn't appear that he did. Hard to say with Deontay Wilder, because sometimes he can pick up little niggles, but we'll never hear about it until after the next fight type thing. So whether it's down to broadcasting type details and other logistical type issues, I mean, I would say it's highly probable they're probably hammering out the last parts of whoever's getting what split and how it's all going to work down, shake down in terms of pay-per-view, because they may simulcast it across the ESPN, their pay-per-view, and also Fox if they're the broadcast partner for PBC. It might be down to those sorts of things and then split the revenue even. I don't know. We'll have to see. I mean, maybe it's the broadcasters who are trying to make sure that they can get some guarantees in for themselves. Hard to say, but yeah, I'm pretty certain that fight's going to happen, and the announcement, it should come soon, because we're pretty much 2 months out from that. And when you say it like that, 2 months and 1 week, that's going to creep up fast. As soon as you get through Christmas and New Year's, it'll be the best part of about 7 or so weeks away after that. It'll come around pretty quickly. We'll be talking about this pretty quickly. So George Michael says he didn't like the excuses either. Wasn't a good look. Even though AJ was average, it is rude to AJ. I guess the performance from Joshua, that's in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, I don't think Ruiz probably realised he was, one, disrespecting Joshua's performance in that, but also the excuses was a poor look for him. So Liam says Parker will want to fight before a potential Usyk fight. Who would you like to see Parker fight next? Well, they've got a whole slew of guys in the Matchroom stable. They need to maybe make some of these matchups. He's sort of past the point where you can just throw him in with another Leopai, although it would have been, if he fights, say, in February, it would have been the best part of, 8 months since his last fight. But yeah, he's on the second of a 3-fight deal with Matchroom, and if he doesn't get the sort of opposition that he's expecting or thinks he's entitled to, maybe at the end of that deal, they go off and join ESPN and Top Rank or PBC. Who knows? So Bryce says, I can't see Ruiz coming back properly. All that money will take his motivation to fight away, in my opinion, although I would like to see him come again. I wouldn't be surprised if he does take some time out. He did after the Joseph Parker performance. And remember, I mean, it's sort of, I think people forget, he got a decent amount of money for that fight. It was actually a decent chunk. It was, both those guys got over 7 figures in New Zealand money, which is over $1 million New Zealand, which when you chop it in half, if it was 1.2, 1.5, whatever, still was a good chunk of change for him. And he did sort of blow through that quite quickly. He always used to, on his social media, because he bought was it a Porsche? I think it was something like that. Used to pop up on social media as Insta story, always driving his fancy car. So, I mean, I guess one thing that'll get him back to the sport if he runs out of money quickly. But who knows what will happen? I don't want to say that he'll be the next guy to fall sort of prey to, everyone sticking their hand in their pocket and him sort of blowing through the money. But, it could happen. I don't know. Let's hope not. So 68 in the chat at the moment, so thank you one and all for being here. And I did sort of say I was going to try keep up on the chat, but I've fallen woefully behind already, so I'll try to really crack through this. So Adam says, Liam, they will rock straight into the Usyk fight if it's for the title. Oh, for Joseph Parker? Yeah, if that comes up, they will. So Wallace says, click the thumbs up button. Yes, please, if you can. That would be much appreciated from my part. James says, Ruiz cut corners in his training camp. The more money Ruiz has and the more money Ruiz knew he was going to earn in the rematch made him soft. Ruiz acted totally disrespectful to his fans for his slacking. Tommy says, I wonder if Ruiz had lost a lot of weight, would it have affected his punch resistance? Well, he did lose some weight, but then he put it all back on and then some. So Punch Quote says, disagree, Arum and Montero have always said he's been inconsistent, missing training sessions, overeating, true colours of Ruiz showed up in the fight. Well, it sounds like part of his training camp was at least a success, and he was down in weight and training well, but obviously, like you sort of allude to there, he ended up missing sessions and overeating, went off the rails. IEB says, by the way, remember when I said that Andy's pics were so photoshopped he might as well get on the Chinese Tinder? Liam says, surely he'll look for a tune-up. Been a while since his last fight. I'm not sure that Eddie Hearn will want Joseph Parker in another tune-up because it's a 3-fight deal. He will probably want him in a couple of meaningful fights. He gave him the gimme in Leopai. It wasn't necessarily Hearn's fault that Joseph Parker, or Parker's fault, pulled out because of a spider bite. So I think they'll want him in something meaningful, because otherwise Parker could be off and just vanish if he gets another tune-up and then only one meaningful fight. George Michael says, wish Parker stopped White in round 12. Was nearly there. It would have changed his position. Certainly would have. So Martin says Wilder should fight Andy Ruiz after Fury. Not sure anyone necessarily wants to see that right now. Right Hook Boxing is in the chat. If you haven't subscribed to his channel, please do so. Great channel. Good broad coverage across the not the heavyweight division, boxing in general. So Themalus Lofi says, coming off a title fight loss, he needs to rebuild. No immediate PBC title shot. I can't see it. And I guess for the next thing for Ruiz is he has to prove to people that he's, reformed to some extent. Because some of his issues, I guess you could sort of say, have been maybe whispers that's been more in boxing circles, gyms, sort of the stuff that Abel Sanchez and Montero in boxing were saying regarding his condition and missing sessions, etc. Maybe it wasn't as widely known as it would have been until this fight. So George Michael, sorry, I'm just trying to catch up on the chat here, says, I'm not being funny, but Puliev is in his 40th year. He should retire. Good jab, but he's old as boots, just ridiculous. And poor Joshua or WBO for organising this joke fight. Well, no mandatories in the IBF or WBO for 2 years, so the day was always going to come where both of them weren't going to call them. So, I mean, when you have 3 belts, holding on to them becomes difficult. I mean, Vladimir Klitschko was a testament to that. He ended up just fighting a procession of mandatories, and that was not people derided him for it, but that was the price of having the belts. Won't become any easier on anyone, especially if someone becomes undisputed. Those belts will probably break up pretty quickly. So Tommy Temper says transnational sports. I will come to that a little bit later in terms of the ratings. They are out. Deontay Wilder on top there. So Wallace says Ruiz earned 18 million, so best of luck to him, and he earned it after the first fight anyway. Okay, I'm just squizzing down the chat here, just trying to catch up. Adam says hit that like, yes please. Zaki says, Dubois versus Hrgovic, who wins? It's a very interesting question. That's probably a question for like 2.5, 3 years' time when it's more likely to happen. But it'd be interesting because Daniel Dubois was on, you may have seen that clip of him with Frank Warren, I think it was on Good Morning Britain. He was asked about sparring rumours about dropping Joshua, and they were very coy about it, but the sort of way that was answered sort of said he did very well, and the smiles and the sort of that sort of stuff, the looks, it made no secret that he'd he was giving across the impression that it did happen. And I don't doubt it. Sparring, a lot of guys go down, but Dubois, a very big puncher, it doesn't surprise me. He's going to be dropping a lot of guys in sparring. But then that Hrgovic, Sauerland, they had tweeted about that clip and alluded to the work that Hrgovic had given Dubois, because apparently Hrgovic worked Dubois over in sparring. That would have been about 12 or 18 months ago. They were sparring together. I've got a couple of pics somewhere of them, coming out of that sparring session. Not necessarily the sparring itself, but the time Dubois was in that gym with Dubois. So Nash says, if AJ was to outbox Usyk, would he get credit from critics being a good boxer? Apart from Fury, who do you think outclasses AJ using boxing fundamentals? Yeah, I think Joshua, in terms of the back foot game, the movement, some of it will be horses for courses. Like he knew that he had to approach the second fight with Ruiz Jr. differently, because he was going to get clobbered on the inside, and that was shown from the first fight, that Ruiz Jr. was beating him to the punch. He had trouble with the speed, so he nullified that by boxing from range. You may see a boxing from range type performance at times against Alexander Usyk. I mean, Joshua won't want to be some sort of stationary target with Usyk, giving him all sorts of angles on the move, and being able to just sort of wear Joshua down, similar to what he did Bellew. But Joshua's a bigger fighter than Usyk, so I mean, some of it will come down to tactics and the game plan they employ. But I would expect, any fight where he's got 2, 3, 4 inches in reach and height, why wouldn't you use the natural advantages? It just sort of seems silly not to. I mean, we're always telling fighters to do that, but then they get criticised when they do. But next, Martin says Wilder should fight Andy Ruiz Jr. Okay, that was just there before. Click the thumbs up, says Wallace. Yes, please. Jim says, it's like 10 a.m. in Sweden and I'm at work. I wished I'd called in sick so I can enjoy your brilliant live stream. Well, thank you for joining the stream for as however long that you can, Jim. Appreciate it. George says, if we all hit like the video, we'll have 80 likes. Good for boxing. Yes, please. So we've got 88 in the chat. Thank you, one and all, wherever you are in the world. Geez, we've already been going for 30 minutes. I'm probably about 200 comments behind on the chat, so I will try to keep up as best I can. And I will move to my next topic very shortly, but we'll get a few more in. So lots of people talking to each other here. Fury said in a recent video, this is from Tim, he hasn't signed anything with Wilder. I think some of that will be, because Tyson Fury changes his story from week to week almost, but he had actually said, and Wilder had said, this would have been about 2 months ago, that the contracts were signed. But he might be technically correct in terms of like the bout agreement, the stuff that you would sign during fight, one or two things that sort of signed quite late in the piece. But in terms of the agreement to fight, the contract, the money or the details and other bits and pieces, if they haven't signed it by now, they're certainly leaving things late in the piece. So Tommy says the announcement for the first fight was delayed also. Yeah, I think it was like late September that it was announced, and then it was December 1st, so October, November. So effectively they had 2 months and a few days. So Force Ghost Fabio says, never seen a weaker heavyweight than Tyson Fury. See, I don't necessarily think Fury is a weak heavyweight, but as is always pointed out, he is moving. He's throwing punches while moving, in motion, so he doesn't necessarily put everything into them. But as I think George Michael says further up here in this thread, that Fury has put hands on Wilder round 12 late and round 1. He was stepping into a few of those shots, and Wilder looked buzzed a couple of times. So, if he, really plants his feet and puts his everything into it, Fury will hit, maybe he's not the hardest puncher in the heavyweight division, but a guy, 260, 6'9" or 6'8", whatever he is, that's going to, have some mustard behind it. But will he, stand and trade, plant his feet and let those hands go and do the damage that he might be able to do with a full force punch? But those comments by Frank Warren, which we would have seen in a video with Fury saying, or that I did on the channel, Warren saying that Fury would have stopped Ruiz Jr., that he wouldn't have been effectively doing what Joshua did, which instinctively I don't think that Fury would have stopped Andy Ruiz Jr. I think maybe that's more wishful thinking from Frank Warren, but hey, they need to have the fight to really find out. But Ruiz Jr., very durable guy. Some of those right hands that Joshua landed in both fights, people would have been going to sleep. So Adam says ESPN and Fox. Unga says not DAZN, ESPN and Fox. Okay, I'm not sure what that's in relation to. George Michael says, is it warm there, freezing in the UK? Yeah, it's starting to get warm here. I don't know if you can hear in the background, I have my fan going. I had to get the bigger fan out, and I've still got it on the lower setting just because it's starting to really heat up here. Zach says Dubois versus Hrgovic, who wins? Pretty sure we just had that question just before. Ruben says, do you think Hrgovic for Dubois maybe after a few fights? No, that's not happening for a while. They're wrong promotional stables for that fight to happen right now anyway. They're probably past that sort of about, If they were in the same stable, maybe you could see a Gorman type Dubois sort of situation, but I think because they're more blue chip, they're sort of among the best 3 or 4 guys that are coming through right now. They're not going to burn them off right now. February the 22nd, 2020, that's for the rematch. Usyk, another UK hype job. I didn't realise someone from the Ukraine could be a UK hype job. But he was the truth at cruiserweight, undisputed champion, so he's a very good fighter. So Matt says 2 months and a week for Fury. Wilder should have started the promotion. Yeah, it's probably going to start soon. Just bear with me here, just having a little bit of water. So Croesus 33 says Ruiz versus Ortiz, Kovnatsky versus Brazil, Usyk versus Chisora, Joshua versus Pulev, Hunter versus Povetkin 2, Parker versus Rivas. That's a good fight. White versus Washington in USA. Yeah, I mean, that's not a bad lineup. Probably maybe like 2 of those fights will probably end up happening, and that is the state of the division at the moment. So Jean-Yves Gaultier says Joshua needs to take that Usyk fight even if it's dangerous a bit. Will be interesting to, and I guess this is the next sort of topic that I was going to cover. So we've covered some of the fight, the fallout, but the what next in terms of Joshua is that WBO or IBF, both having ordered their mandatories. And there's been a few comments that have been left on the channel in different comment sections, people saying, why are they coming in now? Why do they have to order these? Why didn't they strip Ruiz? That sort of stuff. But the fact is, the sanctioning bodies allowed the rematch to happen without any action being taken. So they signed off on the rematch happening. So this situation with mandatories being called, well signalled. It was always going to happen. I mean, we were talking about this weeks ahead of the fight, that there was going to become a situation where there was a bun fight over what was next for either fighter, whoever won, what situation. So I'm not sure why it was a surprise to some people that there was going to be mandatory called. And both these belts, the mandatory challenges, the last ones for both were in 2017. It's the end of 2019. Either fight, either mandatory will be in 2020, so that's a long time. Normally they would happen in the course of a 12-month period, or in the case of the WBA, 18 months. And the WBA's one was the last one that happened, which was in 2018, September of that year. So as soon as these ones are cleared, these couple, even if they work out deals or whatever, that WBA one will probably start to be due and be called. So Boxing Corner says Usyk is all hype, zero power at heavyweight. Well, it's not necessarily just about power. I think we've seen against the guy, remembering he fought Tony Bellew, that was at cruiserweight, I'll give you that, but he was fighting at heavyweight, fighting David Haye, knocked out David Haye. Usyk was able to knock out Tony Bellew. So, I mean, it's not maybe the best example, but he doesn't necessarily need to have Deontay Wilder style power or anything approaching it. He's a very effective fighter. And if people want to really have a look at the guy, go have a look what he did at cruiserweight and how he did it. And everyone's talking up Michael Hunter at heavyweight. Usyk has a win over Hunter. I think people forget. Usyk is going to be a problem for a lot of heavyweights. Some of the bigger heavyweights, the ones with the real reach advantages, that's going to be tougher for Usyk to crack. But the guys where he's 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", around that mark, Usyk's 6'3". He's not a tiny heavyweight. I mean, some of the fights that he's been proposed, like Chisora, Usyk's the taller guy. And also, someone like Andy Ruiz Jr., Usyk's the taller guy there. I mean, there's a lot of heavyweights he's on a par with, in similar dimensions. May not be the biggest in terms of frame, but there's a lot of heavyweights around there that are not massive heavyweights in terms of their size. I mean, Deontay Wilder's about 220, a decent chunk of his championship career. Although, he's 6'7" and that power. But Usyk, he can have a good career at heavyweight. So Croesus says, I want to see White go to the USA and call out Wilder there. So Marcus Collins says, at Boxing Corner, facts. So that's for saying Usyk is all hype. Well, I guess if he gets a couple of wins, what will you say then? I'd like a bit of an explanation on this all hype thing anyway. Wallace says, hi all, anyone who watched Porky's Corner, what's your opinion on his views? Actually, I do watch a bit of Porky's Corner from time to time. He actually had this, it was a 4-part series, it was just in the past week, about Tony Bellew and all sorts of different bits and pieces. He does, a lot of these videos when he's travelling in the car, they're oddly entertaining, the sort of, all of a sudden 30 minutes can go by and you go, that didn't feel like 30 minutes. But he can have some extreme views, but also some very entertaining content as well. So Boxing Corner says, at cruiserweight he was a force to be reckoned with. He won't do anything at heavyweight. I think we'll have to agree to disagree on that. I think perceptions might be shifted if he ends up, say Pulev fights Joshua next, and there's some sort of deal or arrangement where Usyk is after, and say he fights Chisora and gets past him with a good win. A lot of perceptions will shift about his stock in the heavyweight division. For me, he's a quality fighter, that's undeniable, and just because he's gone up from 200 pounds and he might be 215 at heavyweight, he can still, have good fights with a lot of people. And Ungus says that's crazy talk, talking back to Boxing Corner. George Michael says, Parker's kept training hard, he may have improved, he's young, well under 30. Yeah, opportunities for Parker at the moment sort of seem few and far between. If that spider bite, if that hadn't have happened, I mean, if he had have beaten Chisora, his 2020 could have looked very different. Right now, he sort of looks like he's on the outside looking in and at the whim of other fights, happening or not. Sort of chasing, I don't want to say scraps, but he's waiting to see if Chisora and Usyk fight, because if Usyk ends up going a different way, has a direct fight with Joshua, then obviously maybe that will become more viable. So Ruben says, would a Joyce fight be appealing to Parker, or Joyce not highly ranked enough? I think some of that just comes down to wrong promotional stable. Warren is not going to do a deal with Joe Joyce, with Eddie Hearn for, their two stables to cross. So Boxing Corner says, Ruiz doesn't deserve another big fight showing up at 300 pounds. Well, he was 283, but I take your point. Certainly didn't come in the sort of shape that he was expected to. I think people would have given him a pass had he been there or thereabouts at his past fight weight, which was 268, but coming in at 283 didn't do himself any favours. Ruiz has to work his way into a mandatory position. He's got a little bit of work to sort of rehabilitate his image and to get back on terms with fans, because I think there's a lot of disappointed people who were expecting a lot from him, that he was going to come through and do what he did in the first fight, that he'd had a good camp, but it's sort of, some of it seemed to implode upon itself when he decided to say that he hadn't worked hard enough. Which, when you say that and you're the heavyweight champion of the world, it's the biggest fight in the heavyweight division this year, it doesn't, it's, if that can't get you motivated, nothing will. So Boxing Corner says, it's not his punches, this is of Usyk. Looked pathetic against his last opponent, the used car salesman on 2 days' notice. Ruiz is tailor-made for Wilder. Well, Wilder at 6'7", 83-inch reach. Ruiz doesn't move his head a lot. I don't think he'd be able to take too many of those right hands, but that's the thing. Ruiz would have a different game plan. He'd be trying to get in on Wilder and bust him up to the body, but would he be able to get close? Because we saw how Joshua was able to, stay off box from range, didn't have too many issues in that second fight. So Right Hook Boxing says, thank you as always, Boxing Squared, so do check out his channel. So Parker just needs to become more violent and dark like Mike Tyson, that's all. Click thumbs up if you feel me. That's Wallace 0071. Not sure he's got some of that Mike Tyson, grunt or devil in him, but he's a quality heavyweight Joseph Parker, but seemingly starved of the right, or he will get fights, but they're looking for a certain path back to a title. And now that Chisora, that piece seems to be off the table with a possible Usyk fight, they might have to take another step to get closer to where they want to be. Parkas Rivas 2020, what do you think? I like that fight. Okay, just scrolling down in the chat here, I will just have a drink. So Leonard says photoshopped Mario Lopez and Michael Hunter posted pics with Ruiz Jr. 5 weeks ago. He was 100% smaller 5 weeks ago. Yeah, I don't know what happened in those final weeks of camp, but yeah, he obviously went crazy and decided that he'd put the work in. Obviously, it was a pretty decent tapering period for him in terms of what he was eating. So Adam says, and this is of Usyk, so a guy who schooled Vlad in sparring won't do anything against the big boys. So Aiden says, Manila, Zaire, Saudi Arabia, I enjoy the narrative wrapped around these unexpected boxing destinations. Where's next? Nigeria. Well, someone's going to take a step at some point to either Africa or possibly Asia in terms of maybe a China. There's always been talk of a China fight, but does it happen? I don't know. It really depends on money. And I think we've seen it has to be the right fight. Like, you can't, I'm not sure, can you put Kubrat Pulev and Anthony Joshua to China? And would that excite people? Maybe there's just not enough oomph in that one to do something like that. So John says, good morning, Boxing Squared. How do you see Dubois versus Fujimoto going? Thanks again. Probably ending up with Fujimoto in the back of an ambulance. Sorry to say. Dubois lets Mist descend like Green Joshua did, then fights with his face. Not long-lasting style, not an Andre Ward. Hopkins, longevity style. Yoka, best rounded prospect, good defense. Yeah, Yoka's, he is a top prospect, seemingly a little bit forgotten. Boxing Corner says, sparring stories always make me laugh when fans use them to push an agenda. I watched his actual fight against the used card salesman on 2 days' notice, and he was getting tagged and couldn't KO him. And Unger to that says, I respectfully disagree completely. All good, just our opinion until the fights. Okay, I'll get to my next topic. Trying to catch up on the chat. It seems to be a never-ending sort of task, but an impossible one probably. So the transnational rankings are out. Deontay Wilder elevated to number 1, Fury number 2, Joshua number 3, and then Andy Ruiz Jr. at number 4. And I'd note, BoxRec updated, that's the algorithm point scoring system. Joshua now back on top. And then you had the updated ring rankings. Fury remains at number 1. And why I sort of bring this up, and I did a video on the transnational boxing rankings, and some of the chat from different fans, it really is all over the place. And I think because, and some people are very passionate, very, very passionate, but this to me underscores, I should say, I don't know if there's one guy that's leaps and bounds ahead of everyone else yet. It seems to be still too subjective, and even from the different rankings that are out there, there's no one guy that is on top of every ranking, and fans seemingly can't agree on, one guy being, if you did a poll, it's going to come out, all over the place for the top 3 or 4 guys. But a lot of people in that video did say that they thought Joshua should swap places with where Andy Ruiz Jr. had been. But I could see what Transnational was talking about in terms of their breakdown of it. And if you want to catch up with what they were saying, I did cover that in the video. But yeah, I do think that there is... I mean, we know that there's factions within boxing, the boxing community, fans in general, etc. But I don't know if there's one clear guy that's so far out in front. I mean, people say, a lot of people were tucking into me saying, Deontay Wilder, clearly the number 1. He's unbeaten. But then so too is Tyson Fury. And his best win is better than a Deontay Wilder's best win. But then you can make a case for Joshua for overall resume with who he's got on his resume in terms of the quality of the wins. I just think it's all over the place, and everyone will have their own opinion here, and I'm sure there will be some people going hard in the chat about who they believe is the number 1, but we got to have these fights. And this sort of segues me into the whole, a lot of people have been saying it's undisputed and Anthony Joshua's killing undisputed, and I was sort of thinking, but he's got 2 mandatories that are due, so he's got to fight one of those. And people are saying he has to fight Wilder now, but Wilder's got a mandatory with Fury. I mean, do people forget this, or don't let the facts get in the way of a good story or something? I don't know. At the moment, there seemingly is no leeway for undisputed. And even if they decided to pull out of any obligations to fight each other, they'll probably be stripped Joshua at least of a belt, one or both, because he wouldn't have fought, the next guy, which would have to be either Pulev or Usyk. I don't know. I'm not sure people take into consideration the realities of the actual heavyweight division and the barriers that there exist to an undisputed fight. And, if you want to say that that's excuses, well, maybe you should inform yourself of what the actual situation is. Because it seems nonsense to say that there could be an undisputed fight right now. And we're just talking about, just earlier, the Fury and Wilder 2 fight, which is a mandatory in Fury, which the WBC placed on the line, is going to be in February, soon to be announced. But don't let the facts get in the way of a story. Where are we here? Sense Alive says, did you think Anthony Joshua boxed well? Yeah, he did box well. Corey the Kid, anybody who thinks Dillian can beat Wilder, stop doing drugs. White did not look flash against Marius Walk. Him coming in so out of shape, it certainly did help Walk get into that fight. Yeah, not a great look for Dillian White. So Benjo says, big up Boxing Squared from Edinburgh, Scotland. Big ups to you too. Almost as far away from New Zealand as you can get. Leonard says, Bob Arum said today was set in stone. We'll fight February the 22nd in Vegas, probably MGM Grand. Yeah, probably likely, but I mean, all the details clearly haven't been ironed out, otherwise they would have announced something by now. But whatever it is, I'm sure it will get sort of ironed out in the next sort of couple of weeks. So Jean Yu says, the problem with Joshua in June is he could not adjust with the Ruiz tempo after Ruiz caught him with a nasty punch. The best way for him to Ruiz is to get back to boxing ability and a puncture instinct. Jeez, there's so many comments here, so I'm just trying to lost my place. So Theomilis Lofi says, Usyk rightly carries hype as a unified cruiserweight, understandably ranked high in the WBO for his mandatory shot. However, Usyk isn't a top heavyweight, he's a wild card. That seems to be one of the things as well. Him coming up to the heavyweight division seems to, a lot of people don't understand why he's got this title shot, which it is because he was the undisputed king at cruiserweight. He was the super champion in the WBO. He can move up and have a shot, a free shot at the champion in the division above, which he's chosen to do so. Really is as simple as that. And people might say, well, he doesn't deserve it, but he's earned it through the WBO system, their structure, from the lower division. 97 in the chat, so smash that like button wherever you are. Thank you for joining the chat, morning, noon or night, wherever you are. Hope you're having a good one. So Jan Hughes says, Wilder vs White is a 50-50 contest. Both guys are fully ready, no excuses. To be honest, I certainly lean towards Wilder in that one. On the strength of some of the recent performances by Dillian White, it would seem that he could be against a puncher by like Wilder, ready to be clipped. But you can't rule him out completely. And from being the number one contender in the WBC since the end of 2017, and obviously the mandatory since earlier this year, middle of the year when he fought Rivas, he earned that. Now cleared of the UCAD. It does seem, if it got pushed out to 2021, that certainly is an unfair circumstance for White to be in. Hopefully, if Wilder did beat Tyson Fury, that the White fight would be after that. But I'm picking maybe there would be a voluntary against the Kovnatsky. I don't know. We'll see what happens. So Marcus says Wilder will put White in the hospital. John says, great channel. I'm excited to see Usyk versus AJ. That would seemingly be a second fight for 2020 for Joshua if he can get past Pulev. I'm really excited to see what Usyk can do at the top level. And as has been pointed out, he didn't look $1 million against Chaz Witherspoon. But after all the time that he'd been out of the ring, it was a tune-up fight for him. He looked rusty. But there were flashes in there of what he can do, and he's proven himself at the top level before. So UK Rob says, Molina basically said yesterday in the Boxing Voice that he is retiring. Well, I mean, I think that's not surprising. He effectively came for the payday for Hrgovic. Probably got paid okay. Probably not, the money he'd be wanting at this stage in his career as a cash-out opportunity, but it's probably the best around. Not a lot of guys want to jump in the ring with Filip Hrgovic right now. So, War Standard says Molina should have retired years ago, disgrace to the sport. Adam says Josh will vacate the WBO, fight Pulev and the WBA Mando in 2020, which allows the WBO champ a defence before a unification in early 2021. Well, that's certainly a twist on things. Yeah, I mean, the WBA Mando, as I mentioned earlier, that's going to get called at some point. There's just going to be a procession of them given the time since the last ones. 2019, no mandatories were held. So that really, in terms of a financial thing, if Eddie Hearn was able to convince Joshua of that being a better thing for Matchroom, making them more money, especially if they hold on to the belts. But Joshua's made it clear he doesn't want to give anything up. So his client, Joshua is Hearn's client. So Joshua probably is going to have a big say on what happens. Could be a big wad of money to Alexander Usyk to step aside for a fight to be in the second half of 2020. So Leonard says, IBF allowed the rematch exception on terms. The winner fights Pulev next, so it's not a surprise. Yeah, it's always coming. So George Michael says, Usyk is not hype. Many tricks, was solid at the WSB. Talent. Yeah, I think a lot of people forget that at that amateur level, in the World Series of Boxing, that Usyk was fighting a lot of much bigger, stronger opposition. And a lot of these guys are running around at heavyweight right now, and he was holding his own. I mean, people forget about some of these fights he's had with some big, talented heavyweights. But yeah, I guess the caveat with that is several years ago in the amateurs. Yeah, I get it. I get why people are doubting it. So Abdullah says, I've met Usyk before, he's only about 6'1". Well, if he's only 6'1", that would make Derek Chisora about 5'10". Angus says, I think Usyk takes a step aside and fights Chisora, then AJ after that. Marcus says Wilder is soon to be 50-0. So what is he now? 42-0 and 1 draw. 8 fights. That's a long time. If he only fights twice a year, 4 years, 34 at the moment, 38 by the time he would get to 50-0. I think he's going to take a loss or two in that period. I think it's going to catch up to him. I mean, at the elite level, all these guys lose at some point. And it's not a knock on him. It's at some point someone will have his number. It's like all these guys. Themis says White has been mandatory 1 week. Chill out, White fans. So Jen says, don't understand why Wilder doesn't just fight White. I think Wilder's style and size is wrong for White. Would be great on his resume. It would be a good win for Deontay Wilder. Certainly strengthens up his resume if he gets White on there. And Abdullah says Usyk is all hype. So George Michael says Porky's Corner is an expert, very knowledgeable. He does come up with some pretty funny and some good inside stuff too. So Scott says, I don't think Joshua versus Usyk will happen before Joshua versus Wilder. It's interesting. So Leonard says Klimas and Usyk's manager, they will push to get Joshua stripped. Yeah, I think this, and I touched on this in my video today with the whole clock ticking, the 30 days to negotiate, with the letters from the IBF and the WBO arriving within 24 hours of each other. They're not just going to, this is Usyk, even though they're within the same stable. I think people forget it's co-promotional agreement. So it's not like they're completely wedded to Matchroom. So they're not just going to roll over on some of these things. And if they feel that they could get Joshua stripped, and if it's not a multi-million-dollar step-aside fee, they will try to do that. And I have seen a lot of people saying, oh, well, they could get the 2 fights in before the end of May, have one in February or March and the other in May. Joshua just doesn't do that. There's not enough turnaround time for him. He likes to have these big, long camps, 3 months. I just can't see any scope that 2 fights happens before the end of May. None at all. So So Cox's Apple says a heavier Wilder KO's Fury in the rematch. AJ avoids big punches going forward. It's interesting with that rematch because I actually, given some of what we've seen, I'm starting to just lean towards Wilder in that rematch. Some of what happened in the Wallen fight, not necessarily, how much tougher it was, but there was another lapse in the 12th round by Fury there. There was also, a lot of spots in the early part before the cut opened up. And remember, that was a cut from a punch, clean punch. Wallen was having a lot of success working Fury's body. And I think we've seen some things from Wilder, some adjustments that he's starting to make, that if he can stay composed and make some adjustments for the second fight, he can make it a much easier fight for him. And he's shown that he can catch up with Fury, even when he was, going all out and a bit ragged, swinging from the fences, still caught up with him twice. It's going to be a hell of a fight. I'm looking forward to it, but it's that same equation. Can Fury avoid the big punch, and can Wilder land it? So UU says all these casuals thinking Usyk is overhyped. So Jen says, let's see how Usyk deals with Chisora before we pass judgment on Usyk. If he can beat Chisora, he's probably at least worthy of being reckoned as a top 10 heavyweight. Well, for me, I have Chisora somewhere between 15 and 20 in the world rankings. I know a lot of other people have him a lot higher, but it has to be said, whenever he stepped up to world level, he has lost. And I think there's a slight overhyping of Chisora at the moment against the guy in David Price, who was considered washed up a number of years ago, but also Artis Bilka, who was also considered to be washed up to some extent. He had good wins against those guys, but I don't necessarily think that makes him a top 10 heavyweight. I know that's not a popular opinion, but yeah, I think Usyk does actually deal with Chisora, and quite handily. I think he would get quite a wide points decision, or even potentially a later stoppage. So GM Strong with the super chat, thank you very much for that. Great videos with interesting insights. Thank you, Boxing Squared. Well, thank you to you too, GM Strong. I appreciate that. So George Michael says, people forget Usyk beat Majidov, Nestor, Joyce in WSB, then Hunter in Cruiserweight, undisputed in 15 bouts. He's a roadman. Yeah, it's an impressive resume that he's got. Doesn't mean he's unbeatable, but he's going to be a guy that's going to be in some good fights. So DQ says, big up Boxing Squared, big up to you too. War Standard says, Parker has been bum fighting and deserves his stale year. It's a bit rough. Adam Fahey, and this is what I was just saying, Chisora is not top 10. That's what Adam Fahey says. Jamie says perception shift on a fight-by-fight basis anyway. You're only as good as your last fight. Usyk is trouble for anyone, but can carry the weight and be can he carry the weight, be effective versus the top heavyweights? And that's a great point about perception shift fight by fight. A lot of people, and you've probably seen a lot of the Andy Ruiz Jr. fans who are very confident ahead of the Joshua fight evaporate after it, and perception shifted. Joshua was not regarded as a guy that could fight on the back foot, and would he be able to go for 12 rounds? As it happened, he was, and he didn't look necessarily that gassed. He did overhaul his body, redeem himself, and he did prove he's got another sort of string to his bow. So that's that whole perception shifts with one fight. And the other example for Joshua was that June 1st performance, seemingly expected to smash Andy Ruiz Jr. and get him out of the way, but he was ultimately dealt a body blow with one of the biggest upsets of all time. And perceptions were all over the place before and after, and same for the second fight. So great point there. So Hop says, top quality fights just come along too infrequently. Boxing strings along its fan base like no other sport I know of. Not sure I'll keep hanging on. And that's part of the issue. And I've been moaning about it for this year in terms of the quality fights. Not as many as there has been in past years, but they seem to be one a month, something like that. And I'll go to the schedule, because apart from because I'm going to talk about the Ultimate Boxer tournament a little bit later on, apart from that, not a lot on the sort of schedule. Just scrolling down here, so there's a card in Bulgaria that's actually been headlined by Kubrat Pulev's brother Turval Pulev, but Bogdan Dinu is going to be fighting, but that's against the journeyman. We also have a New Zealand prospect who randomly is on that card. That's Patrick Mailata, but that's he's only 3-0, so he's fighting a journeyman. In terms of the rest of the schedule, just looking through, Mark Demori is fighting some random guy, 6-38 record in Germany on the weekend. There's just not, I'm just scrolling down, there's Ruan Visser, the big South African heavyweight. He's in a fight in Cape Town over the weekend. George Fox, a prospect out of the UK, he's at the Brentwood Centre in Essex. You've got Ryan Charles, that's Don Charles' son, he's fighting at, I think it's York Hall, that's over the weekend too. Another prospect, Michael Polite Coffee, 7-0, he's against TBA, the feared TBA. But, you know, a lot of these guys are at the sort of lower end of the heavyweight division, still on the come up. You know, the opponents aren't great. You know, not a lot of people are going to be looking for those fights. And when you consider the biggest fight of the weekend, or should I say it's not really the biggest fight of the weekend, it's a tournament, that seems to be the highlight of this weekend heavyweight action. And after, you know, last weekend, heavyweight boxing, people are interested, people are talking about it. No big event with a heavyweight schedule this weekend. It sort of seems like a wasted opportunity. Yeah, I don't know. It's sort of all over the place. So Abdullah says, never understood the hype behind Parker either. He won a vacant title and lost it in his first defence. You may have to educate yourself there, Abdullah. Check his box rec. He did defend it a couple of times before he fought Anthony Joshua. Chris says, I think Usyk should take the Chisora fight till the heavyweight power before the AJ fight. Hope he does well like Holyfield moving up. Yeah, that's a hard comparison because Holyfield's so successful. I mean, a lot of people have sort of said, you know, Holyfield took a number of fights before he had his, shot at a heavyweight title. But we have to remember, Usyk has an automatic shot. So he could take that route if he wanted to. But he's decided, well, will he get this opportunity? Who knows? He's just going to go for it. And I like the confidence. So God of War says Usyk is a natural heavyweight. 97 kg is his natural weight. His height and reach is exactly the same as Ali. Give him a break. A lot of Usyk talk. A lot of people either up for Usyk or not really sort of buying into it just yet. And, you know, we need to see more. But I think he can be competitive at heavyweight. Same with Murat Gassiev. If he's matched right, he can be successful. Big punches, you know, they're always going to have some success in the heavyweight division. Falling way behind in the chat here. So 89 in the building. So thank you very much, one and all, wherever you are. Let me know I always look at the analytics, and I think that the videos are watched in about 176 countries, something like that. So it's far-flung places around the world. So wherever you are, thank you, morning, noon, or night. I appreciate it. Next comment here. So Zaros 2 times says Wilder can't box like AJ did. Wilder is food for Ruiz's style because Wilder just stands still looking for the right hands to land. I don't think that's quite fair. I mean, Deontay Wilder does have underrated athleticism. I mean, if you saw against Ortiz was tracking forward and after Wilder, and he was managing, this is Wilder, the range relatively effectively. If Wilder just stands there, Ortiz would have been just pillaring him, knocking him out. Cash for Cat says Usyk was coming back from a long layoff and injury against Witherspoon. The next fight or two will show where he's at. Yeah, that's a fair assessment. Adam says FA needs to fight at the next level, up for a couple of fights. Yeah, 2020 is that real seasoning, that final stage of that prospect phase for Ajagba before he gets to those bigger fights. He needs to be in with some durable guys. I mean, that Demirjian fight, I know some people didn't like it because he didn't get a knockout, but it was a perfect fight for him to work on, implement stuff that he's been working on in the gym. And that collectively, they threw something like 1,900 punches, that it's an incredible work rate for heavyweight. And Ajagba did some really nice things in there. Sure, he was getting hit with some stuff by Demirjian, but, he took it well. He showed he's got a chin. Sure, there's more to work on, but aren't these the fights that he should be in right now, testing him? I mean, I don't know why people just want to throw him to the lions. And, you know, like a lot of these prospects and guys who are sort of transitioning from prospect to fringe contender, you know, you need some proper tests sometimes to work your way through, you know, to make sure you're ready for the big fight. So Unger says Hunter proved he's legit heavyweight at weekend, so cruiserweight does count. That was a good fight. I enjoyed that one. I think a lot of us were talking about on the card, you know, just we didn't know what was going to happen with the main fight, and some of the others were maybe a little one-sided. I thought that in terms of the action and the back and forth, best fight of the night, and that was what a lot of people were predicting. The styles did end up meshing quite well. Both those guys, Hunter and Povetkin, able to hit and hurt each other throughout the fight. I enjoyed it. If they do run that back, I don't mind that at all. Still seeing a lot of argument about Usyk here, so I'll skip past this, about his height now. There's a lot of comments here. So I'm kind of Usyk'd out here. So Abdullah says, BoxRec rankings are a complete joke. The sanctioning bodies, at least you have to earn your rankings. BoxRec rankings, like 0 cents. Well, I mean, I think if you look at some of the sanctioning body rankings, how do some people get into those? Because it's not just performance. Look at Trevor Bryan's record. No way did he, you know, deserve being placed at number 1 before getting an interim shot with BJ Flores. And that's no disrespect to, it's not meant to be, to Trevor Bryan, but some of that's more about positioning by promoters and working with sanctioning bodies, and it doesn't often reflect reality. BoxRec is not the be-all and end-all, but it's a measure, and it's one of those measures that at least gives us, you know, in terms of points, it doesn't favour anyone over another fighter. All it is tells you who they fought, and it's a points-based system, aggregates, you know, the qualities of the wins to determine a score. That's all it is. So Marcus says Wilder will completely destroy Usyk 4 rounds at most. Spaghetti Legs says Wilder lost to Fury though. So Leonard says I must be about 15 minutes behind on the chat here, maybe 20. So it's 1 hour 11 into the stream. So the Trans National Board keep it like that because they want Wilder versus Fury to be for lineal champion. Most of their panel always looking for a champion. Liam says Ruiz loses drop 4, Ortiz loses stays put. Abdullah says BoxRec have got Dave Allen and David Price top 25 in the world. That doesn't quite feel right, but it's based on opposition, etc. I guess to some extent as well, if that being the case, and let me bring it up actually. I want to bring this up. BoxRec, where are we? Closed out of the wrong thing, almost closed out of the stream. Ratings. Heavyweight. So David Price is at 25. I can't see Dave Allen there. 34. See, this is the thing though, when you actually look past about the top 20, starts to get awfully thin. You've either got up and comers or guys who are well on the slide and have, you know, been racking up losses. You know, so you can see in the 30s and stuff, Marius Wok, Artis Bilka. You know, you've also got Robert Helenius there, Eric Molina further down, Berman Stavern. Berman Stavern still ranked 40th. And, you know, he's really not been doing much for the past few years. Losses to Wilder, to Joyce. You know, it's still ranked 40th in the world. I think it shows you that past a certain level, the depth is not really there, but there's a top 20, there's about 20 guys that can be in some really, really good fights. So I'll just bring up the software again. So Jason says Wilder Joshua will never happen. It's starting to feel a little bit like that, this whole marination period. Really, it started back in 2017. It could well happen, but maybe it's just going to end up being some ridiculous 5 or 6 year wait, as we were treated to with Floyd and Pacquiao. That's just could be the reality of it. these people working behind the scenes trying to build profile, maximize revenue. After all, it's boxing is masquerading. It's a sport masquerading as a business. No, the other way, business masquerading as a sport. Sorry, getting tired here. 11:15 at night, Friday night, my time. Haven't had a beer, if you're thinking that's altering my perception here. So GM Strong says people are going to have opinions of who is the best. Wilder vs Fury will clear up some of the murkiness in the division. Yeah, I mean, I like that fight, so I hope it does get announced, goes ahead, and we have a definitive result the second time around. A lot of sour taste in the mouth after the first time, and then obviously they were going to have an immediate rematch, and it didn't happen. Fury went off to Top Rank, and it became a bit more difficult to make. I don't know if it's... I mean, I know Bob Arum, as soon as that happened, he said, look, we're going to build this fight into 2 million pay-per-view buys. He's still sort of stringing that line. I don't really know if it's sort of... Is it a much bigger fight now than it was? I'm not so sure. I don't know. I mean, maybe it will do somewhere between 500 and 750,000. I mean, if they did 1 million pay-per-view buys in this day and age in the United States with that market, pay-per-view market, that's really good going. I mean, Canelo and Triple G, those couple of fights, what was it, 1 million, 1,000,003, something like that for the 2 fights. If you can get 1 million pay-per-view buys, that's good going. So maybe we just have to keep expectations in check, because pay-per-view is not what it was. So Jamie says, can somebody explain why Ortiz is regarded so highly? He had a lot of amateur fights, but no medals. As a pro, no decent scalps and 2 KO losses. Well, Bryant Jennings is a decent scalp. That was a very good win at the time that Ortiz got that. Jennings had taken Vlad the distance, and that was pretty much his next fight. That was a good win for Ortiz. Wilder has been champ for years without unifying. Unger says the Transnational Rating Board are the most independent, unbiased rankings in boxing. Doesn't mean I agree with them. And this is the thing, it's all over the place on the rankings. If we can get the fights, maybe we can have a determination who is truly, truly the best. Just sort of hard to, definitively for me, I can't sort of say one is streets ahead of the other, or, 1 or 2 guys ahead of the other at this point. God of War says BoxRec is the most accurate ranking. The algorithm is public and it's only based on who you beat. You could make a case for IBO rankings, but their algorithm is not public. And some of this it depends on what you like, subjective. So Scott, thank you for the super chat there. He says, buy yourself a beer. So I've literally just skipped past by accident about 150 comments, so I might start over, try to catch back up on the chat here, but appreciate that, Scott. I think I've got 1 beer in the fridge. So George Michael says, it's hard not to. Who took some punishment versus Walk? Looks overweight. He can come again though. Yeah, I think if Dillian White overhauls the training and gets himself back into the sort of shape that he normally is, he will just fight better. I mean, I think the weight that he was, it hindered the performance, and obviously some of the stamina, there were some issues there. It was a decent sort of scrap and brawl in the end, but way closer than it should have been. I wasn't that impressed, but I wasn't expecting miracles either, given when I saw him on the scale at a career heaviest weight. So God of War, Wok is a tough dude. He never touched the canvas. Didn't expect White to blast him though. Yeah, but White at this point is Wok at this point well on the decline. I mean, Martin Bacoli really put a beating on him earlier this year, and a very, very good performance. I think some people are really sleeping on Martin Bacoli, the Congolese fighter. If he can, I think he's falling into that camp that it's got to be tough to get him some of the sort of fights that people probably want to see him in with. But, he's with Matchroom now, so they'll be hoping, like Joseph Parker and Filip Hrgovic and all these other guys who are wanting fights but maybe not getting what they quite want. They'll be hoping 2020 brings them a decent amount of the right fights at the right time. So Leonard says, that's my range as well for Wilder Fury, 500 to 700,000. I mean, that's not bad in this sort of market at the moment. I think just with what we've seen this year. Was it Pacquiao? One of his fights, 500,000 this year, and that's the sort of top of the tree. Mrs. F says the only way Wilder vs Fury makes top money is to fight in the UK. JGG says, can somebody explain how pay-per-view USA gets cut up? I assume there's a lot of middlemen. Well, the old sort of what is passed on in terms of the carrier who does the pay-per-view, they get roughly about half the cost. But remember, the fighters themselves or the people they've got to pay. But somewhere around 50% is taken by the broadcasters / carriers, etc. And then the left is split between the promotion, and they've got to pay all the bills. I think people forget some of these big events cost an arm and a leg, lots of costs. But this is where some of the costs can be offset if you get, say for example, the Staples Centre came in, put down a couple of $1 million for a site fee. That could pay a decent chunk of the cost to run the event. I mean, everyone's taking a cut. There are so many people who get paid. It's incredible. It's a wonder that the boxers end up with as much as they do. So, I mean, if they can get a decent pay-per-view for the second fight and they can make some good money, well, good on them. So Unga says Golden Boy and Matchroom couldn't get Ortiz big names either. He was very much avoided back then and won't be so much now. Yeah, in terms of Ortiz getting fights, hopefully, I mean, he's within, as I understand it, he's still with the PBC. There's some matchups they could make him, and I did that video just the other day, so I don't want to sort of go over old ground, but plenty of matchups that make sense, not only for him but for other fighters, like Adam Kovnarski versus Luis Ortiz. It's a perfect fight, one for Ortiz to prove he's still, a cut above other contenders, but for Kovnarski, for him, if he beats Ortiz, he proves that he's ready for a title in terms of building his profile. So George Michael says, nice to see you all dismissing rankings. They are politically based on and only give rough outlines. Arguably, BoxRec is more useful. Agree. Liam Roskell says, Zhang would be an easy sell for pay-per-view for White. See, I disagree with that. I think we've seen with what happened with the Rivas fight. They picked a guy, very good fighter, sort of top 15 type guy in the division, but he didn't have a big profile. Zhang, not a top 15 guy, arguably maybe somewhere around top 30 at best. He really hasn't done much of note at this point. Problem for him is for that sort of pay-per-view, it could be the same thing. They did, 289,000 buys according to the Audience Research Board. That would have been a direct translation of the lower profile of Oscar Rivas. So they sold it exclusively on White's name, and it didn't do probably the numbers that they thought it would do. And I think for Zhili Zhang, it's going to do even less than that. So Right Hook Boxing says he really rates Bacoli, also the perfect style to beat Wok volume puncher. So Matthew says, was there any thoughts from Top Rank to put Fury, who is WBO number 2, against number 1 for possible a vacant belt? Yeah, that has been raised, but I guess it's the thing, isn't it all sewn up for the Wilder rematch? I mean, maybe we will get thrown a curveball, but see, that's the thing. It would only happen if the belt becomes vacant. If they work out a step-aside deal and Fury sort of pulls out now, then he'll have no fight with Wilder, and he could have no fight with Usyk. So it's all about timing. So Adam Fahey is out. Cheers, Adam. Lubak says Bacoli versus Gassiev would be nice. Yeah, and that's the sort of fight I could see Martin Bacoli being up for. He seems to want to just get in with anyone. So John says Dubois versus Fujimoto, your thoughts? It's not going to end well for Fujimoto. We should really take a poll on how many seconds it lasts. I'm saying like maybe 70 seconds max. Jean-Yves says Wilder specializes in knocking out bums induced papas. Unga says, I got US pay-per-view. They have a distributor who gets 10% and multiple providers who get 40%. Angus says, Boxing Squared, what step-up fight do you reckon Junior Farr will have? Alexander Dimitrenko, maybe. Well, probably needs to be someone on that level at this point. Was he 18, 19 and 0? He needs to be stepping up from the Devin Vargases. And that was a much more competitive fight than it probably should have been. So far, yeah, I don't think there were a lot of people sort of looking at that and fearing what Junior Farr would offer on the back of that performance. So Unger says boxers are taxed 40 to 60%. Alex Reynolds says rich man tax is 40%. Sam in the chat saying hello to everyone. Lubuck says Ortiz won't fight a top 50 guy next and will be protected as a boogeyman. See, the thing is, Ortiz at this point in his career, and I covered this in my video earlier this week, I mean, there's no sense in him hanging around fighting guys who are in the top 50 to top 100. It's not good for him and his reputation, and people just call for his retirement, especially if he looks a little one-paced or maybe off his game. And it's going to be hard for him to get up for fighting effectively nobodies. They've got guys in the PBC stable they can certainly match him with, and he needs to, for me, I mean, if he's truly going to try have another go at a heavyweight title, which is going to take at least probably 18 months to get back in position, really in position for a big fight, he's got to be fighting relevant names now. I mean, this is the thing with a lot of these guys. They're struggling to get the relevant fights, but there's all these big stables that they have all these fighters that they could be fighting, but deals aren't getting made. Boxing can be maddening at sometimes. Unger says boxers pay all expenses for sparring, training, travel, accommodation for his team. Unless he's a star, his promoter will pay. Cash for Cat says White should fight Ruiz or Parker next. Well, given the interest, the renewed interest from Dillian Whyte, maybe he will look at, because if his shot for the WBC title is going to be for 2021, he's going to do something in 2020. And Dillian Whyte's been a pay-per-view fighter. He'll want to resume pay-per-view status. And he will know that even if these bigger fights that he takes, there's a risk that he could lose, but he wants to get paid well in the meantime. So I could see him potentially having a Parker rematch next year, because that could be one of the most lucrative fights out there for him. So Alex says he doesn't want to see Parker White. Right Hook Boxing says he's been waiting for Dubois KO market round 1 and 6. 1 to 6 is shorter odds. Okay, I don't know what that is about. Unger says managers, promoters, 30% trainers, 10% sanctioning fees, cut man, third man, flat fee, 5%. That's what I'm talking about. Everyone is squeezing the teat there and taking a drink. Unger says boxers make not much. Yeah, it's like a pyramid. It's like life, other jobs as well, you know. The job market, there's a few at the top really creaming it, and then towards the bottom, you know, there's a bigger base. Themis Lofi says, I rate Ortiz behind Fury on boxing skill. If you don't get him out of there, he'll outbox you. Maybe too old now. Sad. So Angus says, Fujimoto going to spark Dubois first round. I think you need to put, someone needs to put, one of you moderators needs to put Angus on timeout for that comment. That's outrageous. Alex says Ortiz is 50 odd. He's too old now. Right Hook Boxing, Bet365 aren't touching it either. Was hoping for some sure money in Daniel Dubois. I mean, that's, you know, the odds are so short they don't want to put it on the line. Timothy says, good morning from the UK. Congrats to AJ. Haters still not offering credit to AJ. Right Hook Boxing says, haha, Angus. Scott says, Right Hook Boxing, Bet365 like to keep the odds back for a while, but will have them. With Unger saying 50 is the new 40. So I'll just have a look at my list here. Just getting back to some of the topics that we hadn't covered. Actually, yeah, I wanted to mention Joe Joyce. You may have seen my recent rankings video from the WBA. I cover the rankings, obviously, monthly, that sort of stuff. He wasn't in the rankings, and he's not normally in them. He's above them. Was the gold champion. So WBA lists it as vacant. But then a couple of days ago, because I'd asked Sam Jones, look, what's the story here? And he didn't really give me an answer. But then yesterday when I was doing my Ortiz video, which was who's going to fight next, because I had put some comments in there about he could try fight for the vacant title, maybe with Kovnatsky. So I had to go to the website, double checked, and he's been reinstalled as the gold champion with an asterisk next to it, which I don't know what it means, but I had to end up going through that video, which I'd already recorded, and taking out like about a minute's worth of chat about, you know, fighting for a potentially gold title or something like that. So I don't know, you know, it's, yeah. There were a number of people saying that maybe it was because he was fighting for the EBU, that he couldn't hold both titles simultaneously, but for whatever reason, he's been reinstalled as the gold champion, which, when I asked Sam Jones about that, all he said was, and the new. Don't know what's going on there, but looking forward to that fight though. Joe Joyce versus Marco Huck. I think that's a very good fight for Joyce in terms of his development. And I know that, you know, a lot of people are saying, well, he's got to get moving. But at the same time, while he's not moving, while there seems to be maybe a lack of opportunities for him, that's a decent level fight for where he's at in his career. Because if he can sort of, after that, have another sort of level fight, he can be on to a much bigger fight, maybe later in 2020. And I'd still like to see Daniel Dubois versus Joe Joyce at some point. They're in the same stable. Frank Warren probably wants to feed Joyce to Dubois at some point. I could see that happening maybe the back end of next year. So Timothy says, Sam says, I think the toughest fight for Fury would be Usyk when it comes to skill. Lubak says Fujimoto to take Dubois early by brutal nut shot. Okay, someone put Lubak on timeout too for that one. I'm not sure anything is stopping Dubois on this one. I think we're going to see Fujimoto literally on his bike. He will be, this is not going to last long. And the first time he touches him with something resembling a hard punch, Fujimoto is going to go down. He'll probably stay down. Or he'll look to get up, but the referee will probably wave it off mercifully. Leonard says, having Hammer as your best win in 4 years does not keep you at 6. Ortiz should be lower or stop 10. Okay, I missed the last part of that, but in terms of Hammer, I wouldn't mind seeing Joe Joyce fight Christian Hammer. There's probably a few fights that Hammer can be in with. Obviously, talk of Yokohama, etc. Timothy says Parker White would be great. Why not? Both want to be paid. Yeah, I could see them running it back. With White stock having been down with fans and maybe the options not having been there as they might have been, it would seemingly be a lucrative one. And Unger has warned Angus officially. Sam says Parker would win and ruin White versus Wilder. Yeah, but that's the thing. Dillian White likes to get paid. If he's going to have to wait a year, he will have to take some big fights and some big risk to get the sort of money that he's accustomed to getting now. You know, he's been in pay-per-views with Rivas, Parker, Chisora. All of them would have made him decent money. He would have taken a big haircut to face Marius Wack. I know a lot of people thought that, you know, him being added to the card probably increased the price. I don't believe that one bit. They were always going to have that as an expensive card to make as much money as possible. White wouldn't have made a tremendous amount for facing Marius Wack. So Mrs. F says Parker versus Rivas, White versus Joyce. I quite like both those fights. That Parker-Rivas one, that's a sneaky good fight too. Lubak says, I'd prefer to see Parker fight Povetkin, Hunter or Chisora. I'd take any of those. Sam says Ortiz versus Usyk. Be an interesting fight. Probably not realistic. So UK Rob says, what ranking will Dubois receive in the WBC once he wins the silver belt? Well, he was number 15 last month. He was dropped to number 16 this month. He'll shoot up the rankings. WBC wants to be part of Daniel Dubois. They want to be part of the Daniel Dubois business. He's going to be a problem in a couple of years for a number of fighters. He's going to be tough to beat. Who wins the Battle of Britain, Joshua or Fury? If we ever get it, that's the question. This is the thing, I mean, some of these fights, it just feels like there's an air of inevitability that they will happen at some point, but the fighters involved probably going to be past their best, and we won't get a true representation of what could have been in their primes. So Leonard says, Sirius Huck is shot, easy win for Joyce. Yeah, I'm picking Joyce. I just think he'll be too much for past prime Marco Huck. I don't think he's completely shot, but he's definitely not prime. Right Hook Boxing says, I think I'd stay down too. That's Daniel Dubois and Fujimoto. Already I'm falling behind on the chat, so I'll try to keep up on this. So Grim Reaper says, for White, I might give him Dimitrenko, tune-up 6'7 guy, good record. Then maybe Brazil, another tall guy, decent name while he waits. Well, I think Dimitrenko's retired. He had something on his social media a while ago, but, you know, some of these guys always come back for another payday if it's juicy enough. God of War says, I don't think Huck will give Joyce much problems. He may be explosive from time to time, but he will hide behind that Uli Wegner high guard for most of the time. Very possible. The Odd Fella, greetings from the north side of Canada. Interested to see Tony Yoka's development in 2020. Yeah, Yoka has one of the better resumes as a heavyweight prospect. I think because he's fighting in France, out of sight, out of mind, similar to Arslanbek Makhmedov, not getting the sort of headlines that some of these other prospects in bigger markets are getting. But yeah, I think Yoka can make a good sort of move in 2020 and become more of a name people are talking about. So Sid Master says, hello boxing community, you'll stay blessed. Theminist Lofi says, lucky Hay ducked Shannon after Shannon killed that kid with a body shot. Jason says, Fury vs Wilder is going to answer a lot of questions if the fight happens. Agreed there. The Odd Fella says, is Dempsey McKean any good? So it's a good question. You know, he's got quite a built-up record with not a huge amount on there. I mean, he seems okay, but he's still got to answer a lot of questions. I mean, they're talking about Lucas Brown and him for March. That'll tell us what we need to know in terms of a few things, but I mean, I'm not convinced he can go all the way. I think he could probably make a career as a decent heavyweight, but it's kind of a little too early to tell. And I think if he was really going to make a lot of noise, he would have been moved a little bit quicker. Yeah, I don't know. The jury's still out for me on him. You know, there's a number of guys that are coming up that I'm still undecided on where they might be able to go. One, because a lot of times they're not even in broadcast fights. They're fighting guys in clubs and other bits and pieces, and you might see 20 seconds on Instagram. So hopefully, you know, we see him step up sooner or later. I mean, because I think Brown at this point, if Dempsey McKean can't beat a shot Lucas Brown, that's no good for his career. So Mrs. F says, what happened to Ajit Kabayal, and will Char and Trevor Bryan ever decide to fight? Well, Kabayal, he obviously is with SES. He just recently signed a co-promotional deal with ESPN and Top Rank. They're talking about his first fight early in 2020. I wouldn't mind seeing him on the Wilder Fury card. And even if, you know, they could get him, I mean, Ortiz would be great. Probably not going to happen, but another name, if they're going to have some sort of cross-promotional event, Kabayal versus Charles Martin, Kabayal versus Gerald Washington, a lot of guys that they could pit him against. Where did I get to? God of War says Kabayal will fight in February in New York. Unga says, I like how they've been matching Yoka so far, and I hope they keep it going in 2020. A lot tougher than a lot of prospects. R5-8 says, do you think Joseph Parker is a potential threat? Yeah, I mean, he's like a number of other guys. There's some quality guys running around, but, you know, some of it's going to depend on matchups too. He needs to get into a good fight to, you know, remind people that he's still here. God of War says, Stavern and Victor Bisbal were in the mix, but it's not confirmed yet. Oh, okay, for Kabayal. Oh, God, I would hope it would be better opposition than that. Oh, going back to Mrs. F's question about Char and Bryan, yeah, who knows? I mean, it's got to get to the point where the WBA starts stripping some of these guys. Char has not been active for 2 years. Trevor Bryan, 18 months now. Yeah, they were meant to fight. It never happened. It never got the full story, but I mean, it's beyond the point of caring almost. They've locked those belts up and not doing anything with them. So Fraser Kendo was still in the WBA top 15. Why, says Lubuck? Well, it's because he's owed a title shot. He took to the WBA to court a number of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. He's owed a title shot. That was meant to come against Manuel Char. But it all went sideways. There was delayed and protracted negotiations, purse bid, yada yada yada. They finally got it to. It was going to happen in Cologne, and all of a sudden it fell apart. And then it was rescheduled for September last year. And then Manuel Char had that failed drug test. And I say failed because he was never cleared. See, the thing is, and there was a lot of misinformation because Cha was all of a sudden, it just went away. The thing is, Cha was fighting it on a technicality. He was saying no one was there when the B sample was opened. So he was willing to take them to court. And I think the WBA just decided, look, it's just too hard. We're probably going to end up, going backwards on the money front. And they just, dropped it. So a lot of people say, Cha is one of the few guys to be cleared on the B sample. It's not true. There was no representative there for him. So he was going to fight it on a technicality. Where are we? Unger says McKean is not British level. Mrs. F, and he also holds the WBO Africa strap, if you can believe that. Mrs. F says, is it possible to be an undisputed interim champion? Oh, that's a mouthful. Matthew Goodyear says, do you think White's 2 fights in 2020 will be against tall opposition like Wok, for an example, maybe Wallen and Bacoli to get ready for Wilder? Well, if, the prospect of an Otto Wallen versus Dillian White fight, I think for a lot of people, given the effort versus Fury, will be interesting to some extent. And to a degree, I think it's a somewhat low-risk fight, just in the sense that Wallen's not necessarily a banger. Wallen probably would back himself to outbox White, and I think White would back himself to knock Wallen out. I don't think that Dillian White will even entertain the possibility of Martin Bacoli. I think there's a lot of guys in positions that will just avoid him because he is dangerous. He's a big puncher. He stopped Wok. Dillian White didn't even really get close. Although, Bacoli came in shape for that fight. White did not. So UK Rob says Fury said he will fight Joshua once his ESPN deal is done. 2 more fights, I believe. He'll probably end up re-upping for ESPN. It depends which way it lands. Because, say, for example, he ends up fighting Wilder in February. What if he beats him? There'll be a rematch. And what if he beats Wilder again? That would have Fury in the position where he'd be able to ask for a massive deal all over the place. So he may re-sign with them or elsewhere. He'll go where the money is. But, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Obviously, 6 months' time in the heavyweight division is a long time. So Sam says there's more chance for Fury versus AJ than Wilder versus AJ. Get ready for 1,000 excuses why Wilder won't face AJ. Location, deal, not fair, blah, blah, blah. Well, that fight may end up happening. It may just not happen when everyone wants it to. It's the heavyweight division after all. So Theomis Lofi says Fraser Kendo fought Evander Holyfield and David Tua 20 years later. He is still here. He's not really here though, is he? He's running some sort of boxing gym. Is it Chicago? I'm not even sure. I follow his social media, but he's just looking for some sort of payday or cash out. There's no way he's going to end up fighting for a title. And if he does, he could get seriously hurt. And as I just covered, so Leonard's saying, yep, keeping Fraser in there for legal reasons. So UK Rob says, sad to see Danny Williams is fighting in his 84th fight this weekend. Jesus. Right Hook Boxing says, Matthew, can't see Bacoli. I think he's a big risk for little reward at the moment. Yeah. Timothy says, Mrs. F, Fury is undisputed lineal plastic champion, so why not? Said Master, Wilder vs Joshua lost a lot of its interest. We all know the fight will go. What do you think? Well, I think a lot of these fights have ended up losing a little bit of their interest. That maybe it's just the generation that we're now in. I think social media and the general media, the cycle, is sped up so much that something that's a story in the morning is gone by the afternoon. And yeah, I think these old school tactics of marinating fights, I think people are wise to them now, but I'm not sure people are so tolerant of them. And especially when you have other sporting options out there, like an MMA, for example, the UFC and other similar type style promotions, where the best fights are happening all the time. But boxing, it might be once or twice a year. And it kind of, you look at I can see why people are jumping ship and going, yeah, stuff this for a joke. Where are we at here? Lubuck says Parker should call out Ortiz. It's the wrong stable, though. That's the thing. Eddie Hearn's not going to be doing too many favours for the PBC. I mean, they'll give Ortiz the fight, but it would have to be on DAZN and Sky, as you know, as opposed to Parker fighting on Wilder's undercard against Ortiz. Parker Ruiz makes sense. If Parker finished his current deal, joined the PBC, yeah, I could see them making that. A lot of people talking about Horn and Zarafa. I think it's probably going to be a repeat. That feels like that was literally like 3 weeks ago, that fight. So John says, what do you think to Lucas Brown being a fanny by pulling out from his fight with one of his signature eyebrow cuts? I did see that cut, and I thought that, well, I can't say I saw the cut. I saw a small couple of pieces of plaster over an eyebrow. I mean, maybe, I don't know, people will get all conspiracy theorist about this sort of stuff. You could always argue maybe he's got an offer to fight in the UK earlier in the year and has decided to take that, and this one here isn't worth the risk. That's the conspiracy theory. Or maybe it's just a cut and he didn't want to make it worse fighting Bowie Tupou over the weekend. So R58 says Parker needs Tua as a boxing coach. Not sure Kevin Barry would allow that. Okay, we'll go through about 10 or 15 more minutes. I'm starting to fade. We've got, it's approaching 17 past 11 here at night. Approaching midnight here. So Timothy says Cash for Cats Parker Ruiz would be a big fight, especially as well as Parker Ruiz gets on Matchroom platform. See, the thing is, I think it's a good fight. I don't necessarily think it's a big fight. And I'm not sure now that Ruiz has bombed so badly over the weekend just been, that it's necessarily going to have a lot of casual interest in it, because a lot of people didn't watch it the first time around. God of War says, I still don't get why Char and Ustinov were fighting for a WBA regular in the first place. Yeah, I mean, they shouldn't have been. WBA just lopped it on the line and the belt hasn't been seen since. Matthew says, would Warren vs White be good pay-per-view numbers in the UK given how Warren did against Fury? I think it would be similar lines to like Rivas and White, which was I think 289. I think there's a capped market for those sorts of fights where it's effectively trading on White's name to a large extent. Sure, Warren gave Fury a few issues, but at the end of the day, Fury ground through that and he did win it relatively comfortable. There were some awkward moments, but he fought through with the cut, and you know, a few different times Warren gave him some trouble, but yeah, I think a lot of people torch Fury for that, but I thought that was a good performance, the way he overcame that adversity. But apart from those storylines, I don't know how much, you know, you can really build that fight. But that could be the level that White comes back at, so don't discount that one. So Jason says White did come in shape. Stay Puff Man shape. Sure, there's going to be plenty of those jokes to come. So Unger says Warren vs White does low pay-per-view. Cash for Cat says White vs Warren would be competitive. Warren awkward southpaw. Timothy Thomas says Char is a weak and warm drink, no biscuit. Lubuck, I don't see Warren vs White as a pay-per-view. Well, if it was in the UK and White's fighting, they're going to make that a pay-per-view, and they would be selling that as the guy that almost beat Tyson Fury. But I think they have to cap their expectations. After that, Rivas one drew less than 300,000 pay-per-view buys. You might go, what would this one do? A guy that's, at the time he'd be fighting White, still, even though all these people were talking up Warren having arrived in the division as a top 10 fighter, he's still a top 30 guy. He hasn't proven anything yet. He's got, his best win is still Adrian Granat, and it was a couple of years ago. Well, near the start of 2018. So Liam says, don't sleep on McKean. Corrupt Cop says, McKean is a talented guy. Time will tell with him. These guys he spars are tough and skilled. Plenty of rounds with Leopai, tough dude, and Justice Hooney as a skillful kid. Yeah, I mean, like I was saying earlier, McKean, I just got to see more. You know, a lot of guys like him who are coming up, padded records, Haven't seen them in the sort of fights that we probably need to see them in, but if he fights Brown and he wins, whatever the performance will give us a good indication. Weiland versus Schwartz. I would definitely pick Weiland to win that one. Can't really say that I rate Tom Schwartz very highly. Timothy Thomas says White would blow Where's Wallen away by round 7. Fury would say I took his soul. God of War says Frez Akendo could sell his WBA ranking as advertisement space. Frez Adidas Akendo. Adventurous Sex Fury vs Usyk for WBO. Stranger things have happened. Maybe that would only happen if he pulled out of the Wilder fight and he knew that was going to be vacated. It's about timing, that one. So Unger says, I agree McKean is good, but he's the same as British level at the moment. I think he'll have some good fights, but won't go much further. Frez Akendo will become the WBA franchise champion. Well, effectively, he kind of is, isn't he? He was at the eternal spot of number 3 for forever and a day. And Unger says it didn't look genuine, the brown cut. I did think that looks awfully small, and he did say it was small, but I don't know. I do have that. I did put it up on my, it's on his Instagram, but I did put it up on my Twitter earlier. Was it today or yesterday? Liam says, you think Hooney can win the gold? The kid looks good. He does. Timothy says, Parker versus Ruiz was low-key because casuals knew nothing about either men. Will be much bigger now, especially if held in the UK. Yeah, I don't know if that's the right market to hold it in. You could probably hold it in the States or New Zealand. I'm not sure UK would be the right destination. I don't know if it would draw the sort of buyers that people would sort of be thinking it would. Ortiz Parker would be excellent, but the business often ruins boxing. Very true. Mrs. F, do you ever think they will ever hold a heavyweight WBSS? I did a few videos earlier this year on that very topic because there was talk of it. Kelly Sauerland was talking about that, but it sort of never really said it amount to much. And they were talking about maybe starting for February, but you would have need to have announced it by now. But there would be a number of guys that could benefit through such a tournament. And at the moment, someone like Joseph Parker, if they could secure that sort of name, and a few others of a similar ilk, it'd be a great tournament. But the problem would be money. All these guys, the heavyweights, they ask for much more than some of these lower divisions. It'd be a very expensive endeavour. So Leonard says, agree, first time watching it last night. Fury beat Weiland comfortably. Weiland performance overhyped. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people were talking about Weiland being elite after that. He's a good fighter, but, you know, he still lost. He didn't actually win. Timothy says, BS, do you think AJ will adopt fast feet style for the rest of career, or is it about horses for courses? Definitely the latter. I think it depends who's in front of him. I mean, there's going to be elements of it, and if he has to sort of, because one of the things we saw in previous fights, the occasions where he had to and was forced backwards, he didn't look comfortable. But I think if he's forced backward and it's sort of, you know, he's on the retreat because, you know, he's either in trouble or he just wants to get out of the way and have a breather for a second, he's going to look better doing it because he knows he can do it and do it well. He can circle off with confidence. Adventurous Sex says, if Fury doesn't fight Wilder or AJ, what do you think? Okay, I missed that conversation. Follow Boxing Squared on Twitter. Yeah, that's boxing underscore squared. I should know my own Twitter handle. I say it enough. So that is that little underline, that underscore. Stavern versus Brown would be a slow, competitive fight. Oh, who wants to see that though? Leonard says LA StubHub for Ruiz versus Parker. Yeah, I mean, I could see that working. And then that, I don't think you could run it back in New Zealand because of the allegations of hometown cooking, which I think was overblown. I mean, there was a number of people ahead of the Joshua fight saying Ruiz got robbed in New Zealand. I don't think people have been watching that fight. I think they're going on what other people have said and not really watched themselves. It was a close competitive fight. If you watch the post-fight interview, and this is like on TV like 20 minutes later when he's being interviewed out the back, Ruiz said he thought at worst for him it was a draw, so he could see that being a draw. It was a good fight. I had it a draw myself, But 7-5 either way, I wouldn't have been mad at that. But it was what it was. Timothy says, smash that like button. Yes, please. So Theomis Lofi says, good night, fellow boxing fans. # Bomb Squad. Mrs. F says, are there any Aussie heavyweight prospects coming through that is worth looking into? Well, I think, there's been Corrupt Cop and a couple of others. We're just talking about a couple earlier. Justice Huni, who's coming through, but he's still an amateur. He's going to be a name to watch in the future. I mean, Dempsey McKean is obviously right now. There's a guy, just forget his name. I've been following him on Instagram for a while. He's massive. He was in a Lucas Brown camp ages ago. He's like 6'8". I can't remember his name, but he's actually quite humorous too. So Lou Buck is out. He says, great stream, thank you for joining. So 72 in the chat. We'll wrap it up in the next 5 minutes or so. Adventurous Six is, how did you score White and Wok? I think I gave like Wok 2 clear rounds, like really clear rounds, and there are a couple of other rounds you could have given one or two, but I mean, I had White winning. Mrs. F is also out. Seems like there's a lot of people who are either off to bed or whatever, so thank you for joining wherever you are in the world. Timothy says Michael Hunter was robbed. What is his potential? Is he big and powerful enough? I don't think he was robbed. I mean, I think robbery is a much oft-used term in terms of how it's thrown out there. I mean, I had Povetkin winning on my card 7-5, although I've said, in my post-fight and other comments that I had a couple of swing rounds, so I could see Hunter win, but I didn't have either or all racing away with it. I wasn't mad at the draw at all. But in terms of how much he can do, I mean, at the moment, I think Michael Hunter is slightly overhyped, and I don't want that to come off sounding the wrong way, but I think heading into this fight, I think there was some fans that were just rating him as he's going to cut a path and just become the next big thing. I think, he's going to have a very good career and be in some very good fights around that sort of top 15 level, sort of, moving up and down depending on performances. He is an exciting fighter to watch. So Leonard says he scored at 114 all. Sam had it to Povetkin 7-5. So Jean-Yves says Parker beat Ruiz, period. Well, it is in the record book, so technically he did, or factually he did. Ken says White needs to do a free view to reinstall popularity gains he made prior to the UK debacle, with more to him long term, an average to poor pay-per-view return. I guess it depends what could Sky put up for him. I mean, maybe you could make a case that they could have Otto Wallen versus Dillian White on a regular fight night, but is White willing to take the haircut on the payday? That's the thing. So Right Hook Boxing out. Thank you for watching, or listening I should say. Aiden says, if you were stepping through the ropes for a title shot, who would you choose to have in your corner? Ben Davidson, JD's, or Rob McCracken? That's an interesting question. I think they all have their pluses and minuses. I'll let others weigh in on that. I need to think about that one. I mean, it's easy to just sort of say a name, but because we haven't worked with them, you only see so much. They only give so much of themselves in public. So Leonard had it 7-5 to Hunter, close fight. God of War, US media is sleeping on Makhmedov. Well, I mean, it's the same for Yoka. I mean, a lot of people just out of sight, out of mind, in obscurity. Timothy Thomas, BS, would it be a good idea if judges were able to review draws on screen and potentially change the result? I mean, there has been some different things recently. I'm just trying to think. Wasn't it for the World Series, Super Series, they had a fourth judge with like a tiebreaker type thing? You could implement something like that, but I don't know. All these things come with trade-offs too. So Lennon says they were good scorecards for Hunter versus Povetkin. Yeah, I mean, it demonstrated what a close fight it was. Timothy says, Michael Hunter said on Skybox Office interview he was the same camp as Ruiz. Sparring many rounds with him, was in good shape 2 weeks before. I think it was more than 2 weeks before. It was 2 weeks before he got to Saudi Arabia, and he got there about 11 days out. So it was in that month before. Yeah. Ruiz, yeah, he did a number on himself, that's for sure. Scored round by round, it was a draw, but if it was scored on the fight overall, Hunter won. Adventurous Sex, USA barely covers 15, Makhmudov not on boxing fans' radar. Yeah, but some of that is also down to Makhmudov's team, Eye of the Tiger management. They've got him on these cards at casinos. It's streamed via, everything's pay-per-view via punchinggrace.com. And they're very hard on people who post highlights of their footage as well. So a lot of people aren't being exposed to some of these brutal knockouts, and some of it is to protect their, copyright, as it were, their intellectual broadcast property rights, or whatever it is. So some of that kind of doesn't help him either. A lot of these, knockouts aren't going viral. I wouldn't mind seeing him sign some sort of co-promotional deal fighting in the USA, either with a Top Rank or PBC, either or stable. He could get some fights and get on some cards, get some buzz. Someone made a good comment in one of the videos this week about he's in that situation where his friend Artur Beterbiev was, that just half a dozen fights ago he was just completely an unknown, even though he was fighting good fights and cutting a path through the light heavyweight division. Makhmudov is sort of in that same sort of boat. They got to do something for him. Liam says, how long until WBA strips Char? I don't know. I mean, Char, he loves being the heavyweight champion. I don't think he minds not fighting, because he can just call himself a champion who says he's staying ready for the fights. He wants to get paid. He wants to get overpaid. He wants a cash. Crowned Admirer says, 12-round review. How fun would that be? God of War says, I'm very sure I can give you my exact scorecards if needed. For Pavek and Hunter. I thought it was alright. Liam says, thoughts on Yevgeny Romanov? He's solid heavyweight. He's actually had a pretty good year in 2019. A few different wins, the Dylan Carmen win. He's a good heavyweight. He's starting to get, obviously, like a Joe Joyce, turned late pro. He's obviously been fighting a lot in Russia. We'll see what 2020 holds, but he needs a big year next year, like some of these other guys. So Sam says, thanks as usual. Have a great weekend. Looks like Sam's out. Thank you for joining the stream. So we're 2 hours and 1 minute in. I said I was going to wrap it up at 2 hours, so I will. So next 30 seconds, I'll do final comments now. Hunter was held up by the ropes. One could make an argument it was a knockdown. Yeah, I mean, you could. I think AJ has a hand in a lot of the US boxing media. I think a lot goes hush-hush, and sometimes it will be swept under the rug. The Marcellus Wilder positive drug test was an interesting example. Yeah, but it sort of transpired later that there was something with that, where that he ended up clearing that, or getting it, it ended up exonerated or something. There was some media on that. BS, is there a chance Char is really on some kind of ban we know nothing about? That feels unlikely. So John says, what's up, Boxing Squared? And I will leave it there. We're 2 hours 2 into the stream. I caught up on the chat. That was helped by accidentally missing about 100 comments. So apologies if you left something and I missed it. But yeah, we'll leave it there. But thank you for joining me for another week, another live stream. We'll see what next couple of weeks brings. I'll probably look to do a live stream next week. Not sure what's happening sort of over the Christmas period, because it is summer holidays coming up over here in New Zealand. I know for a lot of people, especially in the northern hemisphere, you have white Christmases. Here it's like hot, sweltering barbecue. It's like jandals, shorts, t-shirt, swimming. It's completely different kettle of fish. But I'll leave it there. So we'll see what happens the next couple of weeks. I'll try to keep going, at least for the live streams, over that period. It's likely that I'll probably end up dropping down the amount of videos that I put out, that sort of stuff. Try to have a bit of a break, and I'll start to put a few videos together, sort of year end and looking ahead to the new year. But thank you for joining me, one and all. Look forward to having you back here next week, same time, New Zealand Standard Time, 9:30 p.m. Which is, I think, about 8:30 in the UK, late in the US and Canada, and earlier in the afternoon and evening for Australia and Asia. So thank you for joining me wherever you are, and we'll catch you next week. Thank you very much.